It's great to be back, obviously. I think the reason I'm excited about this webinar is not because it's going to embody a lot of the principles we teach in this new course that Sonia just mentioned, but the new AI sphere that we're moving into and how it optimizes much of what we do is exciting. But when you look at the probabilities for the number of people probably in this webinar right now, half of you are very excited about the prospects of AI and what it can achieve and what it can do for you and how it can, improve a lot of, or at least save a lot of time of your day-to-day mundane tasks. And then the other half of you are probably a bit more concerned, but it is daunting to some extent. It is a bit intimidating. But for the former group, I mean, you're absolutely right. AI tools and even ChatGPT, among others, are very exciting. Using them speeds up a lot of processes, and we're going to touch on some of that today. And then for the latter group who's a bit intimidated by this, we're here to tell you today. And after this webinar, I'm quite sure you'll have a bit of a relief in terms of what AI offers and how you can use it. And the reason for that is because we're going to show you exactly the primary skill that you need in interacting with these tools. Now, just to recap as an introduction, we're entering a new landscape, AI-driven landscape, and I've been researching AI now for quite a long time, and it's getting to a point where being able to use AI effectively is almost becoming a staple within all industries, and even more now in real estate, and we'll discuss that and why that is a bit later. But these tools are evolving. I mean, we started off with ChatGPT. I remember the news headlines when it came out, and there was a lot of news headlines. Let's just leave it there about AI and the potential for it for the future and the risks and all of those things. But now you also have DeepSeek, and you've got Moonshot, and then you've got Perplexity, and then you've got Gemini, which is all updated all the time. And then you've got other tools like a Gamma and Grok and Napkin, which has different functionalities, and Claude. And it's almost like everyone is trying to distinguish themselves from one another. And what the end result is we've got so many tools to pick from that from a scientific perspective, you're getting to a choice paralysis or the paradox of choice, having too many tools to pick from. But we're here to tell you today that you don't really have to worry about that, because if there's only one skill that you need to learn, and that is communicating with this tool. It's all about the prompt. It's all about the clarity of the prompt, and we'll get into those steps throughout this webinar. But at the end of the day, that's the only skill you need to learn. It's almost like developing a new way of communicating, and rather than having to learn a new piece of code or a new very daunting task or a new simulation or methodological approach. So that's just to put the latter half at ease. Now, if you've seen the recent job report, and I mentioned this in the previous webinar as well, industry is in demand for people with analytical thinking, systems thinking, AI capabilities. All of these things merge together. And the benefit that we have here from AI, as you can see on the right side of the screen, it can help you with so many different aspects for us as real estate professionals, from research to sentiment analysis to data summarization. I would not necessarily advise you ask them to do data processing and calculations for large data sets. I've picked up some issues with that in the past, so I don't fully trust it just yet. But it can also automate report generation and all of those things. And it all comes down to AI prompt crafting, which we will get into. But for the real estate professionals these days, as we know, the nature of the asset class is effectively, it's lumpy, it's illiquid, information is illiquid. If you work in real estate private equity, you know that, getting those NAV, those marks at the right time takes time. So you essentially report end of year results only in Q1 of the following year, and all of that, still apply. However, now nothing is stopping you to write a specific prompt instructing ChatGPT or another AI tool to go back through CBR's records of all of their historical reports and essentially dissect all the information pieces, yields, expectations, growth expectations, whatever, from that report, and build your own structured data set, which you can then start to say, okay, how can I use this data to make more real-time, more liquid choices, if that makes sense? So it really helps in terms of data collection, idea generation, and then processing that information to provide you with an output, which essentially is essentially what actionable insights are. And it all starts with a specific prompt. Now let's have a little bit of fun. I look at this prompt. This is a poor prompt example saying, to ChatGPT, tell me about real estate trends. It's almost like you're sitting at the table with your in-laws, or you need to ask someone's father for the marriage in hand, or your partner, and you're meeting the your partner's parents for the first time, and you ask the broadest question you can possibly ask with the hope that they would just talk the entire evening and you don't have to say anything. That's effectively the analogy for this, because if you tell ChatGPT, tell me about real estate, it's going to give you a very broad top, kind of like surface level information that's effectively not very useful. It's going to be too vague, and this prompt specifically is way too vague. There's no specific sectoral. You're not referring to a specific sector. You're not referring to a specific geographic location. So it's not going to give you the desired output if that's what you're asking for. The objective is also not clear. What should the structure be? Should it be a summary? Should it be a report? There's no context, and that's what we mean with a poor example. Now, this prompt example is a bit more detailed, and it's almost you're sitting at the same table with your partners or your in-laws, and you ask questions that's so detailed that you start to annoy them. So that's effectively the analogy that we're going to use here. And as you'll see here, we're very specific, we're very clear, we provide detailed context, and we define the format that we want to receive the output. So you'll see here at the top, obviously, 3 commercial real estate market trends. That's what you're asking for, just 3. You're looking for London specifically in 2023. You wanted to focus on pricing, inventory levels, and you want to kind of synthesize the impact that remote work has had on these trends, and then also outline how to present these findings. And that is, that is, in my opinion, and our approach that we're going to talk about next, that is really the way to communicate with these tools. And it's also important to note that at the end of the day, it's not just a single prompt. It could be multiple prompts. It could be a conversation. You see it as a conversation with someone sitting on the other side of the table that just knows everything and you know nothing, and you just ask them for information consistently on a sequential basis so that it can constantly build on what it is feeding you in terms of output. Now, this is the Bayfield Best Practice Prompting Strategy Framework. We teach this within the course that Sonia is talking about. You guys are seeing it here for the first time for free. So I think to start off with, it's important to note that this 10-step process is not a sequential process. It's more of a 10-step tick box in terms of what is relevant and what is not relevant based on the prompt and the information that you need. So, for example, if you look at point 6, if you're just asking ChatGPT about, give me some information about, London real estate trends based on A, B, C, D, and E, you don't have to ask it to write it in a Shakespearean format to produce some kind of like a role-playing persona or anything. But it is useful if you're writing a report and you need to say, okay, I'm presenting this to senior management. You need to write this in finance jargon or use finance jargon rather than social jargon. But we'll get into an example of each of these in the following slide. So you won't use it simultaneously. You will work through the framework and determine which of these are applicable to what I am trying to get out of the tool, and you'll apply those at the same time. But a final analogy, and as you can probably tell from this is the third webinar, I like using analogies because it's easy to explain and it's quite fun. But when I read legal documentation, now I've moved recently back to South Africa, and obviously I've got to take out new insurance and all kinds of things like that. And as soon as I start reading a legal document, it's just like I get the best sleep ever. I can't go to sleep when I need to go to sleep until I read a legal document, because my brain is incredibly stubborn and it's just telling me that, listen, mate, I'm not reading this. I'm not absorbing this information. And I like using this analogy because these documents are so detailed that sometimes it's confusing and it contradicts one another. So you read a sentence at the top and you read it and you go down the list and you're like, okay, this makes sense. And then you read a sentence at the bottom, which seems like it's contradicting everything you've just read. and that's just massively confusing. I think we've all had that experience. But the reason lawyers specify with that amount of detail these documentations, because remember, it's a legally binding document, is because they want to avoid the risk of anyone finding a loophole. That's the whole point. And the same principle applies here when you talk with generative AI, when you talk with ChatGPT. You want to be so specific and accurate in terms of exactly what you are looking for so that it points the tool in the direction of where to go find the best source of information to give you the most quality of outputs. And as we've discussed in the previous webinar, when we follow the process of collective execution, inputs, processing information, the initial point is obtaining as granular and as of high quality information as you can at the starting point, because that quality of information builds up over time and compounds over time and eventually feeds into your model and is embedded within the output that you're looking from within that model. Now, this is a big table. This is just these 10 points are just the 10 points that you see on the previous screen. We won't go through everything. It's a lot of text, but just to give you a bit of context of each of these, we've already covered, providing a clear and specific kind of instruction, exactly what you're looking for. You have to clearly define the task. You need to use direct language, and you also want to tell it, because if you don't give it an output format, if you don't tell ChatGPT, give it to me in bullet point format or in report format, it will just do what it thinks is possible, and that might not be applicable, which is going to force you to rewrite a prompt and say, do this or do this. No, I don't want it in this format. I want it in this format. You can just clearly, you know, um, um, write it in the first instance. So a good example would be provide a 150-word summary of the top 3 trends in office space demand for 2024 in bullet point format, for example. And then you also need to set constraints. You need to set boundaries. You would say, okay, I don't want you can't write me an essay. I'm just looking for a short answer. You have to define the tone or the style and say, okay, I'm a real estate professional. I'm communicating to senior management. Use that kind of tone. And that is very valuable, because when you sometimes ask a ChatGPT something, or any Gen AI platform something, it will write it in a more like almost like, call it the average tone that it would. It's just the social tone. And sometimes you need it to be a bit more formal. In terms of providing context and example, nothing is going to stop you from saying, okay, listen, assume you are an analyst at an investment bank, or in this example, a real estate investment trust. You have to write a report, and I'm going to give you an example of what I'm looking for in terms of an output, and you would upload that file, and it would produce the output based on the prompt that you've asked, based on that specific template that you've uploaded. And then, even though as humans we get confused sometimes, these AI tools get confused as well. And what I mean by that is, if you're writing a prompt that's a page long, that sometimes interferes. I've experimented with that. So you need to split some of your queries, if it's a complex query, into multiple parts. So start off by saying, listing key factors affecting warehouse property valuations, and then the next step, analyze how e-commerce growth impacts these factors. And then, like, okay, write it in bullet point format, in a summary of almost an abstract version, which I can insert a report, which has this title and is tailored towards this audience, for example. Following that sequential process. And then iterate and refine these prompts again. If it's not successful the first time, and I've had this experience with Perplexity a couple of times, I would ask, because some of you might know, Perplexity is really good for research. It points you in the direction of good resources, but sometimes it points you in the direction of Wikipedia, which is very annoying, because I do not want to cite Wikipedia. Then you have to go into Wikipedia, click that source, and it's just a tedious process. So I specifically say to these research AI tools these days, do not cite anything from Wikipedia within my prompt. And that seems to mitigate that issue. We don't have to touch on role playing persona. We've already really covered that. And then keywords and directives. So when we're asking for, so let's say, what when in the good prompt example, or the bad prompt example, or the good prompt example, we mentioned, okay, we need to provide decent context. So if we're saying, okay, what has the implication of work from home movement been on office prices, a keyword is essentially work from home. Or in this example, what is the financial implications of rising interest rates? So that's a keyword on commercial mortgage-backed securities. That's another keyword. So you make it very contextual, very specific, to direct it in the right path. And then point eight is not my favorite point because it makes you do more work, which we're trying to avoid, right? We're trying to make this as efficient as possible. But I'm on a serious note, this is the most important point in this entire process, in my opinion. And then we've got the second one, which is point 10, which we'll discuss. But you need to validate and test your outputs. I've experimented with AI now for a very long time in developing this course, really stress testing things from different areas, even from psychology to behavioral finance to normal finance to social studies to medicine. And I've ask specific prompts to kind of test where it's going, and then I try to look at how valid these results are. And I've found some key issues with that, which we'll illustrate in some examples later. But it's incredibly important, even as from an ethical and a professional standpoint, to review all the output that has been provided for you when it is provided for you. You need to cross check the resources. And if it's not providing you with a citation, you need to ask it, where did you get that from? Because if we don't, AI is a glorified assistant. So if you have a research assistant at your firm, let's say you're a senior professional, you've got a research assistant or an analyst, when they provide you with information, they provide the resources of where they found the information, because it's our job as leading professionals or the more senior professional to validate that what we're sending out to clients or internally or to whatever is accurate. So I just want to really stress that point. And overloading the prompt essentially comes down to, breaking down complex tasks. You don't want to steer away slightly, because sometimes we write these prompts and we think, okay, but wouldn't that be interesting as well? And then you add that, and then you should have the prompt strategy and what you're looking for done before you even prompt. You should almost have it written down in a Word document to show you don't steer away, because we get excited when you start with your first prompt and then it becomes incredibly exciting on what it produces, and then it stimulates idea. And that's why generative AI is so great for helping you stimulate ideas. It's part of what it was designed to do. And then finally, anticipate and mitigate bias. And I find this is the second most important point in my view, but it's also probably the most fun part. And the reason why I think it's fun is because I've done some research on, some areas which I'm going to show you now. But we got to remember that these tools were developed based on a large language model. And there can be bias in that large language model depending on who the person was who instructed it in the first place. So I know this is very deep and it seems a bit black box, but it is fundamental, because you need to ensure that the output you receive is not skewed, because you want fact. You don't want any bias. The same way we don't want bias in statistics, in a distribution, normal distribution. We don't want any skew. We don't want any kurtosis. We just want a nice normal distribution. Wouldn't that be nice if we got that ever, But that is crucial. And I'm going to explain this principle by just looking at some examples. Now, I don't know if we can use Q&A, but I've asked AI, this is the prompt, generate an image of an analog watch or analog watches lying on a table, all showing the time 10 past 12. And it took like probably 30 seconds to a minute, and it produced this image. Now, I hope so. I wish we were in a classroom now where I could see some hands raised and they could tell me exactly what it is. But this is one of the limitations that I'm talking about in terms of the bias. If you go on marketing campaign for watches, and if you go search images for watches on Google, you will see it show 10 past 10 the vast majority of the time, because this has been scientifically proven to be the best time to put on a image of a watch for marketing purposes. Now, AI has been trained on this so much that it can't even follow your prompt saying to do it 10 past 12. And you can see it's got the second ticker is on 12, but you still have the 10 past 10 like arms in there. So that's the first issue. And then we've got a nice little second one here. Generate an image of three students in front row of class taking notes by writing with their left hand. Now, if this was a gambling game and we say, okay, you can win $1 million if you find, or £1 million, if you find, if you pick one of these two options, but only one is correct. The one is how many people are right-handed, or what percentage of the world is right-handed, and what percentage of the world is left-handed. And that illustrates the principle here. There's so many images of people writing with their right hand and not their left hand in the media out there, on the internet of things out there, that ChatGPT, you have to constantly reiterate, no, that's the right hand. No, that's the right hand. You constantly have to reprompt it to actually get the image that you have. Now I'm using these images because it's easy to understand and to, communicate the principle. But the same applies to code. The same applies to a market report. The same applies to AI when you ask it to summarize data. So I've taken simple land registry data in the past, which is about 900,000 data points, or across 5 or 6 columns, as you're probably aware, because it's freely available. And I ask, okay, I want information about this. Give me A, B, C, D, and E. And it would 50% of the time it would give me the actual correct number. Then I would even shorten the data sets to like 100,000 data points, and the issue would persist. So with large data scale handling, that's where data science essentially comes in. And in this course, we kind of teach you the fundamentals of data science. It's not complicated. It really isn't. You don't have to have a statistical background for this. I don't have a full statistical background to grasp the principles, but having that additional skill is really going to help you in getting the best out of these tools. So I think as a final note, I just want to check the time here. I'm relatively on time today. That's great. Um, Always anticipate that what you receive from ChatGPT is only partially correct. Always anticipate bias. And I'm not saying that everything that you receive as an output is not going to be correct. I'm saying you should prepare yourself. You should do the due diligence to make sure that it is. AI is well trained, but it is not perfect. You and us, the human factor, is where the final output value lie, because we are the person instructing the sequential process, which we also teach in the course, of starting with nothing, generating something, checking that it is correct. AI can't do that themselves. So the human factor is fundamentally important. And that, of course, is you. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I hope you guys enjoyed this lecture.